welcome back to our SOAP video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. And if you're not familiar with the SOAP series, this is just our Bible reading plan that we do here at Oak Tree. And you can find out more information at our website, oaktreechurch.com/SOAP, S-O-A-P. And you'll find our Bible reading schedule on a little card and just more information about that.
Yeah, easiest Bible reading plan you can have.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
We are working currently through the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about 2nd Chronicles chapters 12 through 16. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
So
yes, a lot of stuff is going on in here,
Yeah.
and in fact, too much. We try to summarize at least everything. I don't know that we're going to be able to do that this week. There's a lot going on. Because we spent so much time on David, we spent so much time on Solomon because that was what was in the text. Yeah. Now we're running through basically a 200-year period when we get to the end of Chronicles, where we cycle through king after king after king. And I think there's 20 of them in the south and 20 in the north, right?
Yeah. So in 200 to 300 years, you're going through 40 kings, roughly, that you have to talk about here.
Right.
In there's only like 36 chapters in 2nd Chronicles.
So somebody's life, right, just gets condensed to, if you're lucky, maybe a chapter. I mean, some of these guys aren't even that, and then we're even doing less. Yeah. And I know we were talking about beforehand, but it kind of made me think, what about our lives? Where are we at? And what are people, when we're gone, what are people going to be saying? How are they going to condense our life?
Yeah. Yeah, you've got
was he a
eulogy,
good king? Was he a bad king? Was he?
Yeah, I think you called it our elevator speech, right? In 30 seconds, how do you summarize Gary's life or Daniel's life?
Right. Well, what was your dad like?
Yeah.
Tell me about your grandpa. I don't want to hear everything. I want to hear the the relevant part. So I want to remind everyone. Last week we learned that Israel, basically a civil war is going to happen. And it's kind of already happened, and there's a split, and it splits into two. And so there's the northern tribes and the southern tribes, and you'll generally hear it as Israel and Ephraim as the northern parts, and they have their own king. And then there's also the southern kingdoms, which are Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin always gets left out, and it'll either be referred to as Jerusalem or Judah in there. So just when you're reading, it can get real confusing. So remember those terms. And they have their own king too.
Right.
And their king is more important because it follows the line of David,
which we actually see showing up. That we're reminded of that as we read through the prophets as well, the early prophets before the exile. Right. So anything that's happening, we'll point out the prophets throughout this time period. But Jeremiah and Isaiah and those types of guys, when they talk about Israel and Judah, it's because the kingdom is still divided that way. And so what we're seeing here flows out more than just in the Kings and Chronicles.
Yeah, good point.
We actually see that in the prophecies too.
Right. And it helps date them.
It does help date them.
Where they're at. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have followed, David and Solomon, and now we have Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and he is getting coronated in the north, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. And he has a tactical heir, which we talked about last week, and it triggers a civil war. Now, I'm sure there was other issues besides that, but the big issue in the north was, hey, we're getting taxed. We're getting taxed way too much. We need to have some relief, and he chose not to provide any relief, and that was the trigger for a split.
So
there has to be more.
Now, last week you said something about how young he was, and just sort of off the hip, just shooting from the hip, I said I thought he was 21 when he became king. Right. We find out in this week's reading that I was wrong. I think it was Solomon who was 21. He was very young.
I thought you done one down with some other guy,
pushing back, right? No, it was David who was Rehoboam was 41 when he became king. And so as we were talking about that, it's one thing for a 21-year-old to make a stupid mistake. But for a 41-year-old, I mean, he's new to being king, but
he should have been paying more attention.
Yeah.
Right. So Rehoboam basically gets out of the north by the skin of his teeth with his life, comes back to the southern kingdom, establishes his reign, and then makes a strategic decision that we're no longer going to be following God.
How's that work out for you?
Yeah, right. And it had not just him, but the nation too, or his nation too. Now, that doesn't mean every person. And I think what we're going to find is a lot of people are kind of moving from the north to south and back. We see that in today's world. A lot of people are moving from Illinois because they don't like all the taxes that are being paid.
Right.
And they can just hop over to Indiana and still work where they want to. And Michigan and Indiana are the same way.
Yeah. Well, as the northern kingdom got worse, we see in chapter 15, verse 9, that people were leaving. The people who wanted to worship God were not finding a place to do that in the northern kingdom. And so they came down to Judah, they came down to the Jerusalem area, where they could still, at least some of the time, under there were some good kings in the south. I think 8 out of 20 were good, so not even half. So, but
and good is relative, right? Because once you, it's just relative.
Once you go down, you come up a little bit. You're good.
You're good.
Even if you're not
even
quite
though,
up to David,
exactly.
right? And that's true. That's true. But there was still a place where they could worship God. The temple was still there. The altar was still there. They didn't have that in the northern kingdom. And for every, let's say, good person who left the north got worse. Right. Which, is to be expected, right? And like you said, we see that today. People say, Christians should vote. Christians should, if we're going to save this nation, we have to be involved in the process. And I know a lot of Christians. I know a lot of people who are just like, I'm done with the process, and they remove themselves from the process, which then makes it even worse. I think you described it as jumping from a sinking ship.
Yeah.
And that's true. And they were this is a general principle. We see it in the United States. We see it in churches. Churches start going off in a bad direction doctrinally, or a bad direction, and the good people leave.
Yep. That's a great analogy, or a great example, because then that church continues down that path, because they're getting positive affirmation from the people that want to go there. So,
and it really is a death spiral.
Yeah. For
churches, for countries, and for the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom lasted for 100 years longer than the northern kingdom did. And so, not because they were so awesome, but because at least some of their kings tried to keep them.
Right.
So.
Right. So we have the first king after Solomon, Solomon's son. He establishes his reign, decides to go away from God, and Egypt comes in and attacks him. Right. And Egypt, I always think, is so far away. But as you talked last week, Solomon had extended the lands up to Egypt. So Egypt is actually the neighbor.
Yeah.
So a neighbor is looking and seeing problems in a land and a whole bunch of easy pickings, probably, and came in. And the king and the leaders, they humbled themselves. Which, of course you would, right? Right. But God's got to be looking in their hearts. Right, and see that it was intentional. And he said, all right, I'm not going to destroy with my anger, and my anger is not going to be totally unleashed, but there's going to be consequences. Yeah. Right, and like we said, this was the start. So Egypt attacked Jerusalem, took a number of things from the temple. We were having a little debate on, it said, I think they took everything from the temple, but does that mean they stripped the gold from the walls? Does that mean...
Yeah, I don't think so. It says took away the treasures of the Lord's temple. So there was a treasury, right, where the money was, the taxes and the offerings and everything. Right. So I think they probably plundered the treasury.
Right.
And, if you're an invading army, you just take what's not nailed down.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever you can carry. Whatever you can carry.
And the big one would have been the shield.
The shields,
right? So we... Solomon made a big deal about shields that were used,
hanging on the walls.
Yep. And so those were taken, and then we find them being replaced with was it bronze shields?
Bronze shields, yeah.
Right, and it's kind of an indication of we were in the gold standard, And now we're kind of in the bronze standard.
Well, and like you had said when we were talking, gold was so plentiful that silver was basically worth nothing.
Right.
Well, we blew past silver and went down to bronze. We're talking play money at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's where we're at.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Rehoboam, his, chapter 12 just wraps up his thing, 17 years, and he's done.
Well, and also it ends up with he did evil because
Yeah.
he was not determined, or because he was determined to not follow the Lord.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, wow.
A couple of things I saw in these last few verses. Number one, Rehoboam's mom was an Ammonite who was one of the peoples of the land that even 700 years ago or 500 years ago they were supposed to kick out of the land, and they didn't do it. So the Ammonites shouldn't have even been there for Solomon to marry, for Rehoboam to show up. Right. So we've already got this, this thing. So that's the negative thing. Positive thing. This is sort of cool. Is that a couple of times in this section in our this week's reading we have Iddo the prophet or Iddo the seer who's writing some of this stuff down. Well, we're working through the book of Zechariah on Sunday mornings right now, and Zechariah is called the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo. So if this is the same guy, a lot of people think it is. If this is the same guy, Zechariah wasn't necessarily Iddo's grandson, but in classic Hebrew genealogy fashion,
he was in the lineage.
He was in that same family tree, because this would have been a couple hundred years earlier than Zechariah.
Nice.
About 400 years. Yeah. So that connected Zechariah as a priest and a prophet back to a well-known prophet.
Right. Which is why he would have been included.
Which is why he would have been mentioned.
In his lineage.
Yeah. So fun, just sort of a fun fact there.
Yeah, nice. Chapter 13 is King, is it Abijah? Is that the right pronunciation?
Well, Hebrew has no J, so it would have been, Abiyah or something like that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
Most English speakers are going to say Abijah, so that's which is not at all what the Hebrew says, but that's how we do it.
So 3 years into his reign, he gets into a war with the king of the north, who has been ruling for 18 years. So this is the same guy who started, and we really didn't talk about this guy, but he has an interesting backstory in Kings, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, this is the guy, we talked a little bit last week, that he had fled to Egypt because he was against Solomon, because God said, I'm going to take the nation away from Solomon and give you part of it.
Right. So same guy.
Yeah, same guy. So he and Rehoboam started at the same time. Rehoboam's ended now. Jeroboam keeps going. And we're going to see this throughout the rest of the book as these kings just overlap. I mean, sometimes you've got a king who lasts for a long time on one side and a couple of shorter kings on the other side. Yeah. We're not even going to try to keep them straight. We just need to focus on
right.
Who's in front of us now.
The interesting story in here is the North had an army of 800,000 men, and Judah had their army was 400,000. No way they should win.
No.
And then, in fact, the Northern army even took part of their army and had them come around and attack from the rear.
Yeah.
So again, no way they should win,
Nope.
and they know it. But there was an impassioned speech, right?
Yeah.
God is our leader. We're still following him. Hey, you guys up in the north, you're not.
Yep.
You guys aren't right. And God handed them over, and what is it, half a million men died from the north. Yeah.
I love chapter 13 where he talks about, God is still ruling through the Davidic dynasty here in the south, and you guys have left that. And I mean, all the stuff that we teach and all the stuff we've talked about God's faithfulness and his promises.
They're saying to their brothers.
He's saying to their brothers, he's saying, why have you forgotten this stuff? God doesn't change.
Right.
We're doing what we were supposed to do. We've still got the temple. We've still got the priesthood. We've still got all of this stuff. Where are you?
Right. And it looks like we're about 18 years after Solomon, 18 to 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's not that long.
No, not at all.
I mean, but we're getting to be where the generations that are coming. Solomon was you just heard about him in stories.
Yeah. And we see that in Judges, where once Joshua and the elders who were in his generation died, the nation of Israel just imploded,
Right.
because they hadn't seen the stuff. They never saw the Red Sea. They never saw
Right.
the conquest of Canaan. They never saw it. It's the same thing here.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Then we get to chapter 14. Now there's an issue in chapter 14 because it's rather a small reading.
You have to bring this up, don't you?
Yeah, I have to bring it up. You already said you were wrong, and now we have proof of another wrong.
Twice in one recording, as I'm.
Wow. Anyways, if you're reading along on the blue card, it's marked chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. But you really should be reading verses 1 through 15. Now,
but if you want to read just verses 1 through 5 and prove that I am not completely crazy,
I was going to give them some credit because I did read through 1 through 5, and as I read through the rest of it, there was definitely detail in there and things. But 1 through 5 basically said everything that needed to be said. So I did have to ask whether it was intentional or not.
And I honestly don't remember.
Yeah.
So we'll say it's intentional.
But there's another king, and he did what the Lord wanted, and he was successul in battle.
Yeah. Asa was a really good king for a long time in the south.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he gets a couple chapters. He's in chapter 15:2. The Lord will be with you, and as long as you're loyal to Him, He'll respond.
Yeah.
Which is also setting up. It's gonna come. Yep.
Yeah.
They willingly sought the Lord. He responded to them. There wasn't any war until 35 years into his reign.
He broke down almost all of the it says not the high places, not the super high shrines on the hilltops, but everywhere basically throughout the land. He took out the temples and the shrines and the idols and all of the
pagan
different pagan stuff that had been built up there.
Yeah. So then in chapter 16, 35 years into his reign, the north attacks.
Yep.
And he does something rather odd. Yeah. He takes all the remaining gold and goes to Syria for help.
Yeah.
Right? And he's been told his whole life, if you turn to God, God will help you out. So
what's he do?
So let's solve this ourselves. let's take the gold and go to another nation because this is too big for God. Now, read a little bit into what he says.
Yes, Syria and Israel, the northern kingdom, had a treaty. And so what he did was he was trying to back channel through.
Here's more money.
Right. Here, how about if whatever your treaty is with them, if I pay you more, will you
not go against them?
Go against, be on our side. Right. Because now he would have them flanked.
Right. It's basically you got a bully, right? If you and I are in a fight, we got a third person.
Whoever's going to pay. Yeah.
Yep.
And so he did. I mean, he paid the king of Syria, which is in the north, just north of Lebanon. We've got Syria. Came down, it says, and he attacked some of these northern tribes and some of these northern cities. And so, of course, Israel left, the southern kingdom, and Asa's like, good, I got it solved.
Yeah.
Except
what happened then?
Well, God said, why in the world?
Yeah.
The prophet said, the prophet came and said, what, seriously? This is the path you chose?
Yeah. Now, usually what we've seen in the past was the leaders get together, they humble themselves, and they repent.
Yeah.
And you'd love to see that happen, but it didn't. He throws the prophet in jail.
Yeah.
And they continue on, and there's no sign of God in his heart.
Nope.
Kind of an amazing thing. And when we were talking to what's going to be written about a person, he did well for the first 35 years. The last 4 years of his life didn't follow God, and that's kind of what he's known for now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he has 3 chapters written about how well he did, and then he's got 3 verses written about
oops.
The oops, that 10% of his reign.
Well, actually, it was more than an oops. But,
yeah. But, I mean, and then in his 39th year, he developed a foot disease. It became severe. Even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but only the doctors. And so in the 41st year of his reign, so 2 years he's going through this. He has 2 years God gives him to turn back to him, and he doesn't do it.
He never did.
And so he died. And
And the son took over.
The son took over. I mean, that's the story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is the story no matter what. It's what's going to be written in between.
Yep. And next week, Jehoshaphat, he was actually a good king for a while. He made some stupid decisions, but we'll get into that. But we've got, fortunately, other than this short blip in Asa's reign, for 4 to 6 years, he had a long time serving the Lord. His son has a long time serving the Lord. Fortunately, we see some of that, and that's really what saved Judah for a long time.
Right. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Nope.
Takeaways we've been trying to, how do we, not that you can apply every verse to your life, but how can we apply this to your life? What I had come up with was what was going to be written about you.
Yeah.
What's going to be talked about, you at the end of your life.
That's really the perseverance part of the path, right? When the stuff comes into our lives, we either stick with what we know is true or we bail.
Right.
And if we stick with what we know is true, we gain godliness and we, grow and know him better and love him more. Asa decided he was going to do things his way, and the last 6 years of his life were a miserable failure, basically.
Yeah, right. Especially the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
all right.
That's how exciting.
It is. No, it's good to hear and understand what the nation went through and how tolerant God was for so many years. Letting it happen. It'd be hard for a parent to watch your kids go through all this and nope, they.
Well, we see his grace, we see his mercy all the way through, even though it doesn't necessarily talk about that. We can see him, like you said, dealing with these people for years sometimes, trying to get them to turn back.
Right.
So next week we'll pick up a handful more chapters, 17, and we'll get into chapter 20, 17 through 20, I guess. In the meantime, that was sort of a short summary, a little bit longer, but a short summary of the things that we saw. What did you see? We'd love to hear what you saw and the things that you find interesting. And so subscribe and like and comment and share and all of the things that we do on social media. And we'll see you back here next week. And we'll continue the story of